Check Complete, a referee podcast, is an educational resource for referees by referees, designed to connect and develop soccer officials of all ages and skill levels to better serve the game both on and off the field.
Today, I'm excited to interview Rich Grady. Rich, first of all, thank you so much for taking time to join the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. Appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. We're thrilled. And I say we, it's our whole team. It's not like I have multiple personalities here. So it's our whole Check Complete team. But let me just give a little bit of background on Rich before we share. He's got a couple different angles that we're going to talk to Rich about today, and his journey as a referee and then the current role he finds himself in with the NCAA soccer side of things. So Rich, you gave me some background information. I'm going to do a little brief intro here, as brief as I can be with all the experience that you have under your belt. You started refereeing at age 17. Okay, I won't list what year that is, but you started refereeing at age 17 and worked your way up. State referee, national referee, worked in the MLS from 96 to 2002, and as a FIFA referee from 98 to 2003. On the college side of things, you've refereed in quite a few conferences and have a lot of experience at the postseason side of things. And so I won't go through all those, but worked in the Big Ten, the Horizon, the Summit, the Mid-Continent, Southern Conference, and worked over 30 NCAA playoff matches across all divisions and genders. And so from 2012 to 2021, you've been serving as an NCAA regional advisor and the NCAA secretary rules editor since 2021. You also work as a national referee coach for U.S. Soccer, an assessor for pro, and on the Midwest Regional Referee Advisory Committee. So that's where I've seen you the last few years at regional tournament. And then also on the indoor side. So you stay busy in the winter with the MASL since 2002. Actually, it was 91 to 98. Then there was a little break, and then 2002 to present with the MASL. And then for your day job, you're the social studies department chair and girls soccer coach in Deerfield, Illinois. So quite a long resume there, lots of experience. Let's jump in first on the referee experience side of things, where you got started, how that came about, and that launched, where you're at today. So give us the starting story there.
So my brother is 2 years younger than me. And when we started playing travel soccer, I would go to his games. And in those days, they only assigned one referee, and you had to provide club linesmen, as it was in those days. So I always volunteered to do that. And one of our local officials, who was the SYRA at the time in New Jersey, Tony Cullen, encouraged me and said, "Hey, you're pretty good at this. You should go take a class." So my dad, my brother, and I all took a class and got certified. And our first year of officiating, we would go out as a 3-person crew, even though they would only pay for one referee. So we would all work together, and that was how we got started.
That's awesome. Very good. And I'm seeing a trend as we've interviewed other guests about just the importance of people believing in young referees, having someone look at you and go, "Hey, you're not too bad. You should pursue this a little bit." I think that's a trend that I'm seeing more and more, and just shows how important it is for those of us that have been in it for a while to invest.
Absolutely.
So that's how you got started. So let's talk more about how the progression has gone in your career. What was that climb to the top, if you will? How was that?
Well, first of all, it's like I'm an officiating nerd.
Yeah.
I'll ref anything and everything. And when I was in college, that's what I did. I refed intramural, you name it.
Yeah.
Flag football, basketball, softball, indoor soccer, floor hockey, outdoor soccer, all of that stuff. I just enjoy that challenge. So really, when I finished college and moved out to Chicago for graduate school, I kind of got thrown into the deep end, and I was 22 years old. And at the time, we had a lot of major division games in amateur leagues that were assigned as 1-person games. So
wow,
here you go. You're going to do the major Mexican league in Chicago by yourself. Go have fun. And that's where you learn how to referee.
Yeah.
I had a lot of people who were very helpful to me. Carl Beck, who was a former national referee, passed away, unfortunately very early, but he was the college assigner in Chicago. He gave me a lot of opportunities. Alfred Kleinaitis, who worked for U.S. Soccer and was a big person in Illinois. Steve Siomos, who gave me plenty of opportunities. So a lot of those guys who, took a chance on me and let me work through things and, make my mistakes and learn from it that way. So, I had plenty of opportunities to figure out what to do and what not to do.
Yeah. One of the questions that I'd mentioned before that I'd love to dive into here is with regards to setbacks that you faced along the way. I'm sure there were, as you were getting thrown into the deep end, some moments that you were kind of like, oh, what were some of those and how did you overcome that as you moved forward?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to save that part for the pro part. So let me get to the MLS part, and then
please do. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
That's where I experienced more of that kind of thing. So hopefully this makes a little bit more sense. It was very much a case of being in the right place at the right time for me. I became a national referee in 1995, and the following year MLS started, and they invited a whole bunch of us to a preseason camp, and none of us knew anything about anything. You had a lot of people who, the only pro experience they had was on what would basically be third division stuff today or indoor. And it was very much trial by fire, and you got a game, and if they liked it, you got another one. And if they didn't, they moved on and found someone else. So I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity and did well enough to keep progressing and staying in that. But I think the big challenge for me was always making sure everything was balanced. And this was in a time when this was not a full-time job.
Right.
They didn't have the setup that they did with pro today. And first of all, I think it's terrific for the referees that they can make it their full-time career, and they can have a job that pays well and gives them benefits and has that kind of thing. But that wasn't the world that we were living in the late 90s. So a lot of it for me was always a challenge of how do I balance work, family, soccer, and the times that were probably the biggest challenges for me revolved around some of that, where the stress was caused by that or by kind of a style of officiating. I was, particularly in those days, a much more by the book referee. And my management skills were not, honestly, where I would have liked them to be. But that was also part of the deal in those days. You had a lot of directives from FIFA, and they wanted to see this, this, and this, and go deal with it and take care of business. So there was kind of a little bit of a split. And I think, I had times where I was not good enough on the management side, and I had to figure out how to adjust and deal with that. And, how do you bounce back from a game where, it all goes in the toilet and you've got 4 or 5 red cards and you're on the front page of the sports section somewhere. And that's the kind of thing where it really did help to have balance. And it's like, okay, I can't think about this all the time because I've got, I've got a young kid, I've got a marriage, I've got a job that I've just started. And it was healthy to have that kind of balance in life.
Yeah.
So I think for me, the whole thing about bouncing back is, number one, recognizing, okay, I do need to bounce back. And number two, just trying to figure out the reason we get into this in the first place is because we enjoy it.
Yeah.
And if you're not having fun, if it's always pressure, that's not conducive to good performance.
Yeah. Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah, makes sense.
I think one of the big, like a specific challenge, I had a game, DC and Miami Fusion back when they were a club. And I had an early red card. I was convinced I was right. And team made a tactical change. They took another player off and he F-bombed me on the way off the field and I sent him off. And, one thing led to another and it wasn't my favorite moment. And, then we had a lot of pressure from the league and pushback kind of saying like, we don't want to see this again. You need to figure this out. So the next week I was refereeing in the second division, what was then called the A-League. And the assessor commented, gee, it looked like you were trying really hard not to give cards tonight. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I wonder why. But yeah, it's a learning process all the way through.
Yeah. The balance piece, I think, strikes a chord with a lot of officials. You're right, at the pro level, they're obviously able to be salaried and work that. But I think for so many that are climbing that ladder, right, it's difficult. Moving up the USL ranks and things, everybody's trying to figure out how to balance that. This is not a question we had planned, but is there a practical advice maybe from your time in that, or just what you see now about how someone can kind of successfully navigate the balancing act?
I'll speak to my experience. I don't know that the circumstances are kind of the same for people now, but for me, I made choices in my career that I knew would have, in some ways, a negative impact on what my ceiling would be as an official. And I'm okay with those choices, and I'd make the same choices again. So when I was a first-year FIFA official, I was 3 weeks into my first year of full-time teaching, so I had no tenure. My oldest son had just been born. We're living in Illinois, and my wife's family is from Ohio, and mine is from Jersey, so we got no help.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to go to Honduras for 2 weeks for a CONCACAF World Cup qualifying event, and I said no.
Yeah.
That's not something that typically plays well when you tell people at that level,
Right.
thanks, but no thanks. So I knew that that was going to limit some of my opportunities. But honestly, I saw way too many of my friends and colleagues who either lost jobs or relationships because they were always trying to pursue the next big thing in soccer.
Right.
So I think it's kind of like the advice that you give players when they're looking at colleges and like, okay, if soccer ended tomorrow, would you still be happy here? And I would say the same thing. At some point for all of us, the soccer part stops.
Yeah.
What do you have left? Do you have something meaningful in your life? Do you have those relationships? Do you have the ability to have something else to fall back on?
Yeah. Well, see, it must be why CONCACAF's not reaching out to me to know I'm going to say no. That must be why I'm not getting CONCACAF appointments. So that's good to know. That makes me, I'll sleep easy tonight. I love that. I think that's huge. And I understand the passion for the game, but finding that balance is crucial. And I think we see a lot of young officials that are very gung-ho. It's almost the same with players, like you said. The burnout piece can be real. So finding the balance to make sure that's not the case is huge. So one of the other questions I had mentioned that I'd like to hear is just memorable experiences. You've already talked about that, about one of those games. Are there other memorable experiences you've come across just in your referee career?
Yeah, I had so many, fun, memorable experiences. I think a couple that stand out, getting to do Mexico against Argentina twice in a 6-month span in 1999. The first time in Los Angeles, and there was 99,000 people in the LA Coliseum.
Oh my goodness.
And I got to do the rematch in Chicago 6 months later, and Soldier Field was sold out. And those were really fun experiences. My younger son, who wasn't born at the time, came across a picture that he was doing some experience thing with a class, and he had to explain a photograph. And he asked me for a little context from the game, and I gave him a little bit, and I found the lineup sheets and I sent it to him. I said, yeah, there's a couple guys on here you may have heard of, who were in this game. One was Pochettino and the other was Simeone, who were playing for Argentina. So he was like, oh, so he's a little more impressed than he was before. But those are certainly memorable. I think the craziest experience I had was at the Pan American Games in Canada. Also in 1999, I had Canada and Guatemala, and it was effectively an elimination match. And 15 minutes into the game, gave a caution to a Guatemalan player. He didn't like the caution, so he pushed me in the chest.
Ooh,
So here's a
Yahtzee.
red card.
Yeah.
So then they kind of mobbed me and swarmed me. And as I was walking away, one of them kicked me in the back of the leg. Here's another red card. So now we're 11 on 9 and things are not getting any better.
Yeah.
We restart right after that. And they must have thought, well, he sent 2, he's not going to send a third. Canadian player gets the ball with his back to goal, passes it. 2 seconds later, it wasn't even a slide tackle. The guy just came in and kicked him, flipped him up in the air, and he landed on the back of his neck. So
Ooh.
third red card. So we're 11 on 8 in the 20-something minute, and the only goal that Canada could manage is a deflected goal. So we get to halftime and have to send the Guatemalan coach, and the assessor comes over and communicates with the rest of the crew, and the translated message is, you better find something against Canada, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So 5 minutes into the second half, my fourth official calls me over, and the rest of the crew were not native English speakers. And they just pointed at the Canadian coach and said, "Fuera." I said, "Okay, goodbye." He had stepped out of his technical area asking a question about his sub passes, and he didn't speak Spanish. The fourth didn't speak English. So they just raised their voices to each other. So goodbye. Second half, it's still 1-0. Have to give a penalty against Guatemala. Fortunately, this was so obvious that even they didn't argue. The guy got grabbed by the shirt and pulled back and spun around. So it's 2-0. And all tournament, they've been hammering us, you must have stoppage time. You must have stoppage time. You can't have no stoppage time. So I say we're having one.
Yeah.
At 45 seconds into that 1 minute, Guatemala scores. And now it's 2-1. And I know what's coming. So I'm just trying to find a place to get as far away from their bench as I can before I blow the whistle. And when the game ends, the setup was all the players were on one side and the grandstand was on the other. But they didn't want to have security by the stands. They wanted security over by the players. So there turned out to be a foot race between the Guatemalan team and some 50-year-old security people. And security didn't win the race. So I kind of got surrounded, bumped, punched, jostled. And it was an interesting experience. And, they basically told Guatemala, you guys are on the next plane out of the competition. A couple players got suspended for 6 months. One got suspended for a year. One of them I later refereed a lot in Major League Soccer, Carlos Ruiz. Never had an issue with him in MLS. And this is really before cell phones and things become prevalent. I'm out of the country. It was an interesting experience. I called my wife. I missed her birthday because I'm out of the country. And I left her a voicemail and said, yeah, I had kind of an interesting game. I'll talk to you tomorrow. So when I finally got a hold of her the next day, she said, what are you not telling me? I said, what do you mean? Well, like 30 of your friends have emailed asking if you're okay.
Oh my God.
So it made the front page of the sports section in USA Today, and a lot of stuff. And if my students are interested, that's usually the first thing they find out about me when they Google me. About soccer reffing. So I would say that was certainly probably the most memorable game, not necessarily for all positive reasons, but
right. Wow, my goodness, that is wild. Good grief. This is off script slightly, but as you've gone through all these experiences at all sorts of levels, we see all the stuff with on the college side, obviously the professional side. Are there lessons that you've learned through this that you've taken into life?
I think as my involvement in the sport has become more diversified, and the more I coach and do things from an assessing side and an administrative side, if I could go back and tell my younger self, figure out how to deal with people, because that's what it's about, instead of just everything is black and white and by the book, things would have been a lot smoother. I think the fact that I coach now makes me a better official when I do officiate, because I understand where coaches are coming from, and I've been in their shoes to some extent. So, my advice to people would be to get involved in the game in multiple ways and multiple perspectives, because I think it does help you as an official.
Yeah. Yeah. So have you been sent off as a coach yet? Was that?
Once.
Oh, okay. I won't make you tell that story.
Well, we have time. It wasn't justified.
Oh, okay. Well, now I do want to hear.
So I was an assistant coach for our boys team, and we were playing against the hometown high school where I lived. And at that time, high school rules allowed for a soft red card. So if a player got 2 yellows, they could be replaced.
Mm-hmm.
And one of our players got a second yellow, and it was deserved. And the ref started the game up before we could put a sub in. Mm-hmm. And all I said was, "Sir, we're supposed to be able to sub on that." And he blows the whistle, and he comes over and he looks down and he says, "You're on the field." And I look down. "No, I'm not." Boom, red card.
Whoa.
I was like, okay. And then he wouldn't tell me why. And I sent my captain over and he said, "If you don't get out of here, we're going to forfeit the game," and whatever. So I left. Game was over. I came back in. I asked him, I said, "Look, I'm not yelling. I'm not screaming. I just want to know why I got a red card." And his response was, "If you don't get away, I'm going to call the police." Okay. I found out later at the end of the season, one of our players' father was a diplomat with the Mexican consulate in Chicago. And he spoke to the ref after the game and asked the ref basically, "Why'd you kick our coach out?" And the ref, I guess, knew my officiating background, and I was on the FIFA list at the time. And he said, his response was, "No FIFA referee is going to embarrass me by pointing out I made a mistake." So that was why I got a red card. So I had to go call my athletic director and everything and say, "Yeah, this happened." And fortunately, the assistant referee's version of the story was consistent with mine. So when they called the assigner basically told the referee, "Don't write this up because it's not going to be good for you if you do."
Yeah.
So I got the red card, but I was never officially suspended.
I didn't know if maybe he had played for Guatemala in a game against Canada and that retribution for something here. Holy Moses. Well, you kind of already answered the question about advice, but is there anything else? And one of the things I was curious is, advice about just getting started for those in that place, and or advice for those who are in that mobile, like upward mobility, trying to kind of reach the top, if you will.
Yeah, I think, for the ones getting started, I think everybody they want to go from 0 to 60 right away.
Yeah.
And I think there was some wisdom in the way things were set up when I was starting out. Before I became a national referee, we had a requirement that you had to be at the time, a grade 5, a state referee for 5 years.
Mm.
And I think one of the things that we've done with referee development in this country during the days of the Development Academy and other things is that we have been so exclusively focused on youth events that we've neglected the adult side of things.
Yeah.
And to me, especially if you live in a community where you have really competitive adult soccer, and preferably with a lot of different ethnicities, that's how you learn how to manage people.
Yeah.
And survive. And I think we do a disservice to people if we kind of fast track them to the pro environment without that step, because I think it is a necessary step. And then I think, when people do get into that pro environment, they're trying to figure out, like, what do I have to do to get noticed? I think the single biggest thing is just be a consistently good communicator and decision maker.
Mm.
And, some of the other stuff you can't control.
Right.
You don't know who's going to see you at what time. You don't know anything else. All you can control is your performance, and just try and be a consistently reliable person.
Yeah.
So that your name comes up as someone like, okay, I'm confident putting this individual on a game.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. I want to touch, before we get to NCAA soccer side of things, I just want to briefly touch on the MASL, because I think that's a whole different beast. And I've seen some of it being in Kansas City. I've watched some Comets games, which I feel like I always get my money's worth every time I watch a Comets game. And and I want to talk more MASL when we get there in the winter time, but
Sure.
you've been involved in that league for a long, long time. That seems to be a kind of, if you really have to be able to manage man management in there, it appears. What's that experience been like for you?
Absolutely. I think the thing that I had to learn as a young referee, because that was my first experience professionally, was in what was then the NPSL. You can't run away. There's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
You got walls. You have to be able to deal with people. And I grew up during the time when the original MISL was going on, and I was in the New York area, so I was a fan of the New York Arrows, and I really just enjoyed the sport. So it was really fun to me to be able to get a chance to officiate that sport when I moved to Chicago. And, in the days before, a lot of people had turf fields. If you're in Chicago, you're not doing anything outside from November to maybe early April.
Right.
So if you want to develop your officiating skills, that's a way to do it. So it's been something that's always been a part of my officiating. I really do enjoy it. I like the different combinations and permutations and the different rules.
Yeah.
I'm a big hockey fan too, and there's some similarities to that sport.
Oh, sure.
With penalties and administration. It's just fun. That's why I do it still. I still enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy watching those games from a safe distance most of the time. So no, I enjoy that. So that's refereeing career. Transition to another hat you wear. Talking about NCAA with rules and things like that. Unless there's anything else that on the referee side.
Go with it. That's fine.
Great. No, that's awesome. I appreciate all you shared with that. So let's talk NCAA rules changes. We talked a little bit about this on a previous episode, and so we've kind of shared some of those. Your role with the NCAA soccer, just tell us briefly where you're in that role and how long you've been in that role.
Yeah, so I was for the last 10 years what was called a regional advisor. So that means I'm one of Ryan Sigich's assistants, and I would help develop educational material, assign referees to postseason matches, that kind of thing. And Ryan and some other people suggested that Ken Andres's term as Secretary Rules Editor was coming to an end, and that I might be a good person to go for that. I've always been kind of a rules person and enjoying that aspect of things. So I threw my hat in the ring for that. Interviewed, got appointed, and this was in the summer of 2020. And the plan was to kind of have a 2-year transition window where I would shadow Ken and, learn on the job and kind of see how everything worked. And Ken and I were able to work closely through the limited 2020 fall season and the much busier spring of 21. And, I was quite shocked and saddened to find out that he was seriously ill and then passed away in June of 2021. And at that point, the NCAA said, look, you were already being trained. You're going to start now. So wound up jumping into that. And that's certainly been a different experience because, I get a lot of video clips. I get a lot of emails from coaches, conference administrators, that kind of thing. Some of it asking for rule interpretations. Some of it saying, here's video. What the heck was this referee thinking?
Yeah.
What can we do about it? But it's certainly been a nice opportunity to engage with the sport that I've been involved in for a long time. Yeah. I started officiating college games when I was still a college student, and now I've got a kid playing in college. So, it's always been a big part of my referee stuff.
Yeah. So before we get to the changes that we'll see, which will be in a 2-year cycle here, how do those changes come about? Give us just a background of the process.
So in the fall of actually every fall, but particularly the rules change year, the NCAA will solicit proposals. So, you have a suggestion for a rule change, send it in. This year we had numerous ones from the two most popular ones were change the sub rule and get rid of overtime.
Yeah.
Some variation on that. So we might have had 74 different variations of get rid of overtime. But anybody can make a suggestion. There's a survey that goes out where we take the most popular suggestions and put them out there, and we ask for people to say comment on this. And the committee then meets. There's a committee that has 8 voting members. 4 of them are from Division 1 and 2 each from Division 2 and Division 3, and they're divided between men's and women's representatives. And that committee is the one that votes on the changes. So in January at the coaches convention in Kansas City this year, we talked about here's the feedback we received. And we actually did another opportunity to say, hey, look, our participation rates are not really where we want them to be in terms of coaches responding to the survey. So the committee met and hammered out the initial draft of the proposed changes. And that included the change to the reentry rule. So there was a proposal to make the second half just like the first half in terms of substitution rules. And then there's always a comment period. So that was sent out for comment. And there was significant pushback from pretty much everyone in the community except Division 1 men who said, we really don't like this change. So that's why that change was ultimately not adopted. When the changes come through the NCAA Men's and Women's Soccer Rules Committee, there's also a final group that it goes to. It's called the Playing Rules Oversight Panel. That's an NCAA group that is in charge of playing rules for all NCAA sports. So they have the final stamp of approval on whether something goes forward or not. And they might get involved with things, let's say, they want to be consistent across all NCAA sports, or they're very cost conscious of not imposing additional burdens on the membership.
Sure.
So, they wouldn't want to change the uniform rules every year. And now schools have to go out and buy a whole new set of uniforms, that kind of thing.
Right.
So it's about, looking at the big picture of college sports when that group weighs in.
Yeah. Interesting. That's fascinating. So changes and we've already talked a little about that. What changes should we expect to see for the fall?
So I think a lot of them are not going to impact the way that we officiate the game.
Sure.
But I'll include some of the minor ones and the major ones too. So we're going in rule book order here. So the game roster, this is something that coaches brought up, and basically now they just have to give a copy of the roster to the scorekeeper. We're not doing the exchange it to the other coach and chase it down and give it to the referee. The referee needs the roster. They check with the scorekeeper. So we're really trying to reduce the amount of paperwork and allow the coaches to concentrate on getting ready for the game instead of swapping pieces of paper with everybody.
Yeah.
A second one, right now, if we have a player temporarily leave the game due to injury, if they left on the side opposite the benches, in 2021, they would have had to go all the way back around to the bench side to re-enter. We changed that so it's now consistent with FIFA rules. You can re-enter with the referee's permission on the side of the field where they were removed from the game. Referee uniform one down the road, the NCAA is putting together a committee to look at the issue of a referee uniform. And basically what we want to get is to the point where we are with college basketball, where there's one official uniform. And I think right now the NCAA looks at it and says, okay, you turn on a game, here's one crew wearing one set of uniforms, another crew wearing a different brand of uniforms, a third crew wearing a different brand. And it's just not a good, consistent visual signature.
Sure.
So I think the focus is going to be on, can we get a simple uniform that reduces the need for referees to carry around 10 different jerseys, and get one that just says, here's the look for NCAA soccer officials.
That's great.
So that's going to be phased in hopefully by 2023.
Okay.
Some post-game things. One of the changes made during COVID was we didn't have to physically sign the box score anymore. We could verbally approve it or visually look at it and say, yes, this is correct. Big one that does affect the playing of the game is video review. So if anybody is in a game where they are using video review, that can now be used to determine if a foul is inside or outside the penalty area. You can't look at video to say, should that be a foul? But if the referee has called the foul, they can use video review to say it's inside or it's outside.
Interesting.
Protests. One of the big things that came up last year, a change that was made right before COVID, was the introduction of a violent behavior 2 red card with an additional game suspension for those acts that were basically above and beyond and we really felt had no place in the college game. And there were some times last year, honestly, when referees got that wrong. So we wanted to have a bit of a safety net. So this year, teams can protest. If a player is given a violent behavior 2 red card, there's going to be a 3-person committee that will review that. And that will be Ryan Sigich as the national coordinator of officials. It will be myself and one of the regional coordinators who is not representing a team that was involved in the game.
Okay.
So the idea then is if we decide that was an unwarranted situation where a player shouldn't be suspended for 2 games, we can reduce the suspension to 1 game. We're not talking about overturning red cards. We're just talking about reclassifying it from a violent behavior 2 to a violent behavior 1.
Sure. Makes sense.
The overtime stuff we touched on briefly, but regular season overtime is now gone. Postseason overtime, there was a strong sentiment from the coaches that due to the variations in weather and other things that they wanted an opportunity to play the same amount of time in both directions. So postseason overtime will now be played to completion. There's no more sudden victory. A big change that we had was what to do about suspended games. So in the past, if a game did not progress to 70 minutes and it was impossible to restart it that same day, NCAA rules mandated that if you were going to redo the game, it had to start over from 0. And soccer was basically the only sport doing that. I think there was a lot of thought that that was unfair. And the committee decided that that criticism was warranted and we're going to change it. So now that game can be continued from the point of interruption, just wherever you left off, the stats and everything go forward and you pick it up whenever you can at a mutually agreeable time. And then the last thing is they enhanced the spitting at or biting has been defined as a violent behavior 2 red card. And we included coughing at another person on that as well. That's something that first came in during COVID. So those are the big changes. There's a lot of stuff in the book itself that when it comes out, people will see we've tightened up some language. We've tried to make it more consistent. We haven't really changed the way things are being interpreted, but hopefully the book itself is a bit more readable and makes a little bit more sense.
Sure. Absolutely. Wow. Oh, that's a lot. And for the soccer nerd, you're right. That probably is thrilling to be able to go through all that and put it together. No, that's great. I think there will be hopefully maybe some additional trainings or discussions about that as we move forward. And ISOA could be maybe part of that, or NCAA trickling some of that down just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Should we expect to see something along those lines?
Yeah, in speaking with Ryan, I think the plan is that there are going to be we're going to return to a couple of in-person NCAA seminars like we had pre-COVID in different areas of the country. I've been in contact with various people from the local chapters from NISOA, saying, when is this coming out? Basically, the final edits of the rule book just went to the printer today. So look for some stuff coming out officially soon. Fortunately, I think there's not a whole lot that's going to require significant training and interpretation. Saying like, we don't have overtime. that I think most
Right.
referees will say that's a welcome change, but I
Right.
don't know that that's going to require a great deal of preparation on our part.
Right. Right. It sounds like maybe some more. I know you guys did quite a bit of conversation about VB1, VB2, and fighting. It sounds like maybe even more clarification on that lines. But it's nice to be able to have the committee to review those and adjust that as needed, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's one where I think we just have to adjust our calibration on that to make sure that we're not over punishing or under punishing.
Right.
And really, I think our message to referees is don't go looking to make something violent behavior too. It should
Right.
jump out at you. You know, when you see one of those video clips and your immediate reaction is, ooh, you know,
Yeah.
that's what we're looking for.
Right. Very good. Well, Rich, thank you so much for your time. There's a lot here, and this was fantastic. I really appreciate the conversation. The one question that I warned you was coming, and I asked all of our guests is there something that if you don't say it, you're not going to be able to sleep tonight?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's been fun doing this. To all of the people who have seen me over the past 5 or 6 years at either U.S. Youth events, regionally or nationally. This year, I will not be dividing my attention between multiple things. So both of my kids have gone through it, and they've played at regionals, they've played at nationals. They're both too old now, so there will be no more Grady's on the field at those events. So people don't have to deal with either one of my kids as a referee, or my wife and I as fans.
There you go. There you go. You didn't have any spectators that said they weren't going to be shown up by a FIFA referee spectator and throw you out.
I'm very quiet when I watch my kids play.
I believe that.
My wife, not so much, but I'm quiet.
Mama Bear stepping up. Absolutely. Well, very good. Thank you so much, Rich. We really appreciate it. And I'll see you this summer in Indiana. So thanks for your time.
Good. Thanks, Gordy.